environment, I don't know. I have no idea if it's ever going to work. I guess I won't know until we try it, and then I'll have to just go
Right.
online if it doesn't work. What else can
Yeah.
you do? But I just couldn't
Yeah.
give all of my students that I'm teaching in upper levels, we are at a very regional university, so our students typically tend to be on campus or from the surrounding area. We don't have, what am I trying to say? We don't have a large number of residential students. We have a large number of commuter students. So they were going to be in the area anyway, and so for my classes, it made sense to try it, but we will see how that goes.
Well, we are at time, so I'm going to get us started. Hi, everybody. Let's see. Here we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to History Happy Hour Equal Rights Amendment. My name is Callie McCune. I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Indiana Historical Society. I'm really excited to see so many of you here. Hopefully you have your beverages ready and to talk about a topic that I've been fascinated with since before I moved to Indiana about the Equal Rights Amendment. Tonight's happy hour is brought to you with support from One America Financial Partners, a national provider in the insurance and financial places marketplace. We're really appreciative that One America has come on to support us for these history happy hours and allowed us to continue to bring events like this to you virtually. At the Indiana Historical Society, we aim to be Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We do that by collecting millions upon millions upon millions of pieces of paper-based material, whether that's books, letters, photographs, diaries, maps, buttons, the list can go on, and then find interesting, exciting, intriguing, or ways to share it with you, whether that's through publications, exhibitions, or events like this. It is these pieces that tell the diverse, unconventional, even saucy stories of Indiana, and we're excited to bring you one of these pieces today. So before I introduce Mary, our moderator, I have a couple pieces of logistics so you know what's going on. For this event, Erin and Mary will chat for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. If you have a question at the end or as we're going along, feel free to drop it in the question and answer box, which you'll find in the bottom part of your screen. We'll keep an eye on them. I'll answer the ones that I can really fast, and if not, we'll keep them together and then ask as many as we can to Erin when we get to that portion of the program. You've all been muted tonight, but we do want to hear your thoughts. You can add your comments in the chat box as we go. That's the little chat icon to the left at the bottom of your screen. Make sure that you're replying to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your reply. And also keep an eye on that area. I'll be putting in links and URLs as we go along. Don't worry if you miss one. We'll be delivering them to your inbox in a follow-up email tomorrow morning. Just so you all know, this program is being recorded. You can catch the replay on our website, indianahistory.org, in the upcoming weeks. If you enjoy this program and want to come back for more, I tell you we have things for you. Join us next week for a brief history of underwear with fashion historian Karen DePaul, and then keep an eye out for upcoming conversations throughout the month and into the fall. We're going to be talking about suffrage, Jewish migration, cemeteries, more fashion, and so much more. You can sign up for those at indianahistory.org and find out about other virtual offerings coming to an internet-connected device near you. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Mary Gervitz to get us started.
Thanks, Callie. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in with us today. My name is Mary Gervitz. I'm an archivist here in our Library and Archives Department at the Indiana Historical Society. And with me today is Dr. Erin Kempker. She is a professor in the Department of History, Political Science, and Geography at the Mississippi University for Women. And she spent some time in the Hoosier State doing her PhD and MA in history at Purdue University. So thanks, Erin, so much for being with us.
It is my pleasure.
So since it's happy hour time, are you drinking anything interesting?
No, nothing interesting. I did not have time to go out and to get myself anything interesting, so I'm stuck with my usual, which is tea. but that's
I
all I
mean,
could manage. We're about ready to start the semester, so it was no fun for me. Just
no
tea.
fun for me either, because I'm here in the office, so I'm drinking water. However,
Let's
I
hope the
did,
audience is doing better.
yes, I did take a poll though of what like thematic cocktails would be good for the ERA topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I got some really good answers, which include tab and whiskey, cosmopolitans, a French 75, or she persisted Prosecco. So there we go.
That is fun.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, Big Sister Feminism, and sort of just, your main research idea?
Well, I came to the book idea because I knew I wanted to do a women's history project, and I was innately interested in the second wave feminist movement. And I came to the Indiana Historical Society, where they just have this rich, deep collection or collections related to the second wave feminist movement. And so it was just a natural fit for me. The harder part, of the part that I had to really sort of get my mind wrapped around, was as I was reading through the second wave feminist collections there, the Hoosiers for the Equal Rights Amendment, Now's collection, Indiana Women's Liberation, or Indianapolis Women's Liberation newsletters and things like that, what I kept seeing were glimpses of the conservative women that I really did not understand. And quite honestly, I didn't understand them for years. And it took a really long time for me to try to figure out what it was that they were trying to, what it was they were doing, what ideas they were really organizing around. And so that was the harder piece for me. I feel like the feminist history part of it was just a natural, easy fit. And so the book itself ended up being a book about what happened when these two movements interacted in the mid 1970s into the 1980s in a state like Indiana, a state that has a bipartisan, or at least a two-party, strong two-party, and even third-party history. It's an interesting state politically, but it does have this sort of tendency to, what is it that Madison said? Evolution, not revolution.
Yes.
It tends to be a state that's conservative in how it approaches political ideas. And so it was interesting to see the arguments that the feminist movement sort of began to shape in order to push for change, but to make that change palatable to this, conservative state. And so the book documents that side of it, the feminist side of it, but also the conservative side of it, and the longer history of conspiracy theory, which is where a lot of their sort of understanding of the ERA came out of. And I tried to put literally both sides on the same page and just sort of like walk through what happened as they, for lack of a better word, had a showdown about something like the Equal Rights Amendment. So that's kind of the book, I think, in a nutshell.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. That was a great elevator speech about a book that is, gets really deep into all of this. So I think we should sort of take it, from the beginning, and can you tell us a little bit about, what is the Equal Rights Amendment, and when is it first written?
Okay. The Equal Rights Amendment is an idea, certainly as long as suffrage, as old as suffrage, I should say. For many women who participated in the push for the right to vote, which we know culminated in 1920 with the 19th Amendment, the national, the constitutional amendment for women's suffrage. For many of the women who participated in that, though not all, because the movement itself was divided even then, for many women, the ERA was the logical next step. It was if one half of the walnut was voting rights, the other half of the walnut was just the idea of equal rights all around. And so the Equal Rights Amendment dates back to, the early 20th century, as feminists like Alice Paul and others were pushing for what they considered the completion of this kind of extension of women's rights and women's role. So the National Women's Party and women who supported this idea of women's equality pushed for the Equal Rights Amendment then and had been pushing for it since the 1920s, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all the way into the 1970s. It had divided women, suffragists, I should say. Not all suffragists were sure they wanted equality, or that it would be a positive thing for women. Certainly, women who came out of the social working world and the labor movement, there were protective labor legislation for women, and an equal rights amendment would complicate the protections that women had at the time. For some women, the idea that women would be treated separately than men as the working class was problematic in and of itself, because they really believed that all workers, not just women, needed those protections. But the Supreme Court had been much more amendable to the idea that women needed protecting and not men. So they had managed to get protections for working people as women that they could not and did not achieve for men. And so that was a sticking point for the Equal Rights Amendment. It divided really even the suffrage movement. Women and men who supported the suffrage movement did not necessarily support the Equal Rights Amendment. So the idea of an Equal Rights Amendment was long, but it was divided, and that really changed. Honestly, you could look at New Deal legislation like the Wagner Act that provided that workers have, without any language about gender, like a federal minimum wage, a maximum hour law, no child labor laws. These things were gender neutral, so they eliminated kind of some of that need to protect women as a separate class. And then as we got into the 1960s, you started to see just sort of that whittling away of women's protective labor legislation. And the more you whittle that back, the more opportunity you have for an equal rights amendment. And so we really saw that kind of change then as we got into the late 1960s and early 1970s. And for second wave feminist movements, this was a no-brainer. To them, it was so natural and so obvious. And initially, it had real legs. It got a lot of support. States were ratifying very quickly as Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment, in 1972, and you saw states just rack up the ratifications. And you did see that until you really saw the conservative women start to mobilize and organize political resistance, and they slowed it. And the last state to ratify was, of course, Indiana, and it was a slog. It was a terribly bitter and brutal battle for the Equal Rights Amendment in Indiana.
So since we're talking about this political divide that sort of happens, and how this became a wedge issue, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the groups, both the pro groups and the anti-ERA groups, and maybe some of the specific Indiana women? I know you mentioned some in your book, who were taking leadership around the issue.
Mm-hmm. The organizations would definitely be the Hoosiers for the Equal Rights Amendment. That was an organization that really got started in 1972. It was Birch Bayh really introduced the Equal Rights Amendment nationally, and so Hoosier women were primed, and you had all kinds of professional organizations, women's organizations, but all kinds of professional organizations lining up behind the ERA. And they sort of created this coordinating committee called the Hoosiers for the Equal Rights Amendment, and that was formed in 1972 as well. And so that was the umbrella organization for other organizations and individuals, by 1974, for other organizations and individuals to come together to push for ratification at the state level. The National Organization for Women was in operation in Indiana before the Equal Rights Amendment, so it also mobilized to support the ERA and really grew because of the ERA, the National Organization for Women. And then you actually had other kind of liberationist enclaves. Fort Wayne had a feminist liberationist sort of community. The Indianapolis Women's Liberation existed before the Equal Rights Amendment. So there were these communes and like these little liberationist enclaves that were more radical, certainly, than a lot of the folks that were aligning behind the Hoosiers for the Equal Rights Amendment. But they all agreed and kind of came together in support of the ERA. And the book talks about, because the Hoosiers for the Equal Rights Amendment had different presidents over time, but it was definitely something that even, Richard Lugar was behind. So mainstream Republicans really were on board. This was not a partisan issue in 1972. You had Republican and Democratic women and men supporting the Equal Rights Amendment in Indiana. It becomes a partisan issue by 1977 and 78, but that's one of the things that the ERA did, is divide the parties on this issue of women's rights. And we know that division now, but this is really, the Equal Rights Amendment is what is creating the division between Republicans and Democrats on women's place and women's status. On the conservative side, at least the organizations, I'm not doing well with the individuals, but I'm hitting some of the organizations at least.
Yes.
It's really Stop ERA, Phyllis Schlafly's organization that dominates. There were some pre-existing ones, and I certainly talk about the continuity of anti-communist groups that then fed into these anti-feminist organizations, and we can talk more about that. But Stop ERA was definitely the major organization that conservative women mobilized around. And then from there, the Concerned Citizens Against IWI, International Women's Year, which is another feminist event of the later 1970s. That's another conservative organization. So those are two of the major ones that I look at in the book.
Yeah. So you mentioned this sort of when we were first talking about Indiana being an interesting place for politically, and then you chose Indiana as sort of your focus of where this battleground for the ERA is happening. So what is it about Indiana?
I struggled with writing this because you're trying to, as soon as you put it into writing, it seems sort of inauthentic. I mean, it's hard to capture, the political essence of a state, but I'm not sure, except to say that Midwestern writers and authors, and especially those, looking at Indiana, we keep coming back to this same idea that there seems to be something about the politics of the state and the culture of the state that supports, and like I said, Madison talked about it in his books, evolution, not revolution. I mean, it does give you Eugene V. Debs. There's a socialist party in Indiana, and I don't want to in any way downplay the fact that radical politics absolutely exists in the state and has a history in the state.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there does seem to be this idea that being nice means not making people uncomfortable, which would mean that you avoid, radical change. I think, there was a book that I talk about quite a bit in my book on Indianapolis and the civil rights movement, and the title is Polite Protest, which is a little bit, of a disjointed idea, polite protest. But again, we just keep coming back to that idea that people who are advocating for change feel the need to create arguments that are, for lack of a better word, I guess, using the feminist language, low key.
Yes. So you talk a lot about this sort of you mentioned this low key feminism.
Which is their language for it. Yeah. Like that's how they kind of described it, that we're going to low key this. And, they, at one point, Hera is describing, like, we're trying to portray the mom and apple pie version of the feminist movement. We're wives and mothers too, which seems to be, again, when we're talking about the second wave feminist movement, I mean, the whole idea is that, you're really challenging those traditional roles for women. And yet there is this need to sort of also embrace that kind of traditional conservative viewpoint, even within the feminist movement, and maybe portray it as, more conservative or conservative leaning, in order basically to get the Equal Rights Amendment through a state legislature that is dominated by men.
Yeah. And then it's the low key strategy type thing, that is sort of, I guess, ultimately to the detriment of the feminist movement, and the ERA in Indiana. Is that? I don't know.
I struggled with that one too, because
I feel like
I feel I don't want to make judgments about what the the activists did what they felt like they needed to do
Yes.
to get the ERA done. And let's not remember, they did it.
Yes, absolutely.
Indiana ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. They were successful.
Yes.
And it was a slog. They fought hard to get that. And so in the end, they're successful. And, you know, is it because of that strategy? Well, certainly they won with that strategy. At the same time, it does seem pretty clear that the coalition that they had built around the ERA was really worn out and tired, and they fractured pretty quickly after the victory of the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And so by the time you get to International Women's Year that summer and into 1978, so Indiana ratifies in 77 the Equal Rights Amendment, and then by 78, you've got a conservative victory in the International Women's Year event, a really quick turnaround for the state, you know, to have this high watermark of the Equal Rights Amendment passed. And then by the next year, they're electing a conservative anti-feminist delegation to the first women's rights conference that has been federally supported in the country's history.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a disconnect.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the International Women's Year Conference and like how that came about? Because that is definitely an important piece of this as well.
It is, and it's not nearly as well known today as the Equal Rights Amendment. Like you'll hear a lot of discussion of the Equal Rights Amendment, and there's now talk about reviving the Equal Rights Amendment. So you're seeing even some of old arguments rehashed in 2019 and 2020. But the International Women's Year, we don't see that much about. That was a United Nations directed event. It was to celebrate this decade of women, and it was supposed to recognize sort of women's global achievements driven by the second wave feminist movement and this global reckoning that women's place is expanding. So the United Nations was encouraging all countries to participate in this decade of women. And the United States was absolutely going to do this. And Jimmy Carter started this planning, and Congress was on board with this, and then it kicked into the Reagan administration. But the idea was that there was going to be a series of state conferences, women's rights conferences. Every state and territory in the nation was going to hold one of these state conferences, and that would actually be preceded by regional conferences. So there was, you know, a Lafayette IWY conference. So there were these regional conferences that built to a state IWY conference, and then at the state conference, delegates were elected to go to a national United States IWY conference, which was held in Houston. And most states sent a majority feminist delegation. It was supporters of the Equal Rights Amendment, and it was women who supported abortion rights, for example. And federal child care, daycare centers was a major one, and changes to rape law and women's domestic violence legislation, protection for women in situations of domestic violence. Women who supported this, that usually state delegations were made up of, but Indiana was one of, I think, 11 other states that sent a majority anti-feminist delegation who actually opposed the platform of the United States IWY National Conference, and they were a minority delegation at the National IWY. And so Indiana was in this unusual place of having both passed the Equal Rights Amendment and has a majority anti-feminist IWY delegation, separated by really only a few months. And that just tells you just how much on the fence, right, the state was, just how that tipping point sort of happened. And honestly, best we can tell, the conservatives really used the ratification of the ERA to drive out attendance at IWY. They were really galled by that the ERA passed in Indiana, and that drove participation for their constituents to IWY.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell if I'm giving you too much or too little, because since we can't really see anybody else's faces. So I don't know if this is too much or not.
I think it's perfect.
Okay.
I think it's perfect. One of the, you mentioned it a couple times in the book about you need women to fight other women.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's a quote from somebody else's work, but yeah, I do think that idea was definitely in play, that men would have a hard time being critical of the second wave feminist movement. They could dispatch the men, right, as ogres and as backward thinking, and that it was really going to be conservative women's job, and they were needed in this fight against the second wave movement because they were uniquely suited to fighting other women. You couldn't immediately dismiss them as misogynists since they were women themselves. And honestly, Joan Gubbins, the senator at the time, I think there were two women in the uh, Indiana Senate in the 1970s. Julia Chambers, I believe, the Democrat, and Joan Gubbins, the Republican. And Joan Gubbins led the anti-feminist faction of both Stop ERA and IWY. So it was a female senator in the state that really led the anti-feminist movement. And I think she really did see it as her role, an important role that she played in limiting the growth of the feminist movement.
Absolutely. So we kind of touched on it a little bit about how the ERA has been in play a little bit more recently because Virginia ratified.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? 2019?
I think it was 2019, but I'd have to.
I know time is
it.
like irrelevant now, so I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was 2019. So can we talk? What do you think about like the future of ERA?
I have no idea. I
am
no prognosticator on these things. I mean, I think, there'll be a lot of questions, legal questions going forward.
Right.
Many states, after they passed the amendment, they passed also rescission. So they rescinded their ratification. So how do we count those votes? There's obviously decades between these votes. How should we understand that, and how will courts interpret that? I think, unless we're going to start the process over again, and if we're actually going to build on that, the work of the second wave feminist movement towards ratification, I think we're going to have to hammer out some real details legally to figure out how that's going to be done. At the time, the reason the ERA hit the wall was because Congress put a clock on ratification. Right. And it hit that 1980 clock, and it actually got an extension, but then it blew through the extension as well. And so it was dead in the water at that point. So again, what is the legality of picking it back up again this many years later? I definitely, if nothing else, it speaks to I think just sort of that baseline gut reaction of so many feminist men and women to support for the Equal Rights Amendment. And it really did pull together just about, I think I say it in the book, just about every stripe of feminist. Any kind of feminist basically is supportive of the ERA. Now, they might not have all thought it was the most important thing, and they kind of started to get, well, they definitely started to get tense about the prominence the ERA had in the movement. Kind of like, there are other issues here, but it for them, for most feminists, it's just sort of like a definite yes, that's like kind of, yeah, for sure. We're on board with that one. So we shall see.
It's going to be interesting to see for sure.
I'm curious to see, coming out of COVID, I think, one area in which we are very different than a lot of European countries and other industrialized countries is our childcare and parenting kinds of provisions, and the Equal Rights Amendment will definitely, that kind of language is supportive of a family rights. And so I think we will be circling back around to those ideas. Something that was used against the ERA a lot at the time was unisex bathrooms and the draft. But since we have women in combat positions, I've been really curious as to seeing, that was a major issue in the 1980s coming out of Vietnam, that women could have been interpreted that women would be drafted. And at this point in time, if that's the case, I think, one, we've gone to a volunteer army and military, and then two, we are more comfortable than ever as a society with women in combat positions. So those are things that were really effective against the ERA that might not have as much power in the 21st century.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Can you just kind of want to circle back a little bit to, since I'm an archivist here at the Historical Society, I thought that it might be interesting to tell everybody a little bit what it's like doing this sort of extensive archival research for your book. And what sorts of sources did you use, and what was the most helpful? And, you know, you can also talk about like how wonderful our library staff is here.
Listen, if I think back so positively on my time at the Indiana Historical Society. If you're in the audience and you have not gotten a chance, I know it's not safe right now, but when it's safe again and you can go out, I spent 2 years going about every other day to the Indiana Historical Society, and it's been, gosh, it's been over like 12 years, you know, since I was in Indiana, and I still remember that time. I have a little postcard that I picked up at the IHS of the canal out front, and
Yeah.
I keep it on my desk because it's such a beautiful facility and it's so pleasant. And the staff are wonderful, and you have this gorgeous reading room. It's kind of like if you were going to have a movie of an archives. Typically speaking, an archives is like in the basement. It's dirty. You know, you're breathing in, you know, terrible HVAC air. There's never a window. And then you go to the IHS, and it's kind of like Harry Potter library style. The windows are huge. There are banks of windows, these beautiful old wooden tables that you sit at. It's clean. Um, it's
Can you like film a commercial for us?
Yes, it's gorgeous. It's so lovely. And I would go
But I will,
there
yeah.
and
And I will
spend
also,
days looking at those documents.
and we love having researchers who like take up residence with us for a while. It's great.
Now, on the other end, a lot of things have changed in 12 years, technology-wise. I was
Yes.
one of the first wave of researchers who made use of EndNote. I think I was the only one at the time who was really creating my own mini database using EndNote. So I actually transcribed a lot of the documents that I was looking at into an EndNote program. And then I also did some copying, but I was poor. So I could not afford copies
Yeah.
because of how
Yeah.
much material. It's the late 20th century. We're in the age of Xerox.
Yeah.
You know, these people can really put out
Yeah.
content. And so I could not digitize everything. So I ended up just transcribing old style, you know, on my computer, but it
Yeah.
was lovely. And I created an enormous database with thousands of entries that I still continue to have and use. And it worked very well.
Yeah. Well, and now we have changed policy a little bit, so you can take in like a camera or phone, and you can take pictures of most things. It depends, but most things. And then also with COVID restrictions, you can come visit us in the reading room, and you just have to make an appointment with us first. But we are open for business, so we are welcoming researchers back for sure.
Well, it's lovely. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is. And
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, I've been to a lot of archives, and I archived primarily at the Indiana Historical Society, but I ended up having to go to the Library of Congress because they had the ERA America collection that I used for the Indiana files. I was in Kansas doing some of their counter-subversive. They actually had some organizations that were tracking right-wing organizations, and so I was in Kansas using some of those archives. But yeah, it was nothing. I mean, it all paled in comparison to the majestic scene of the Indiana Historical Society.
Can you just real briefly before we take some questions here, can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what you're currently working on or what you're currently interested in studying?
So honestly, I finished my dissertation in 2008, and the dissertation it got me this job, and I moved to Mississippi University for Women, and I'm now the chair, and teaching is my primary responsibility, and so my research has had to take a back seat. But it took me a long time to come to terms with the conservative movement and understanding that. It took me a lot longer, and so it wasn't until 2018 that I published the book.
Right.
And now I think some of the outstanding work from that book that I would like to finish up on relates to the conspiracy theory and the
Yeah.
conspiracism that the book kind of uncovers. You know, I want, my focus is always going to be on women. That's where my interests are. But there is, I think, an article to be had in the person of Revilo Oliver. He was a John Birch Society member and a notorious conspiracist, and his conspiracy theories continue to affect people into the 21st century. When I was at Brown University researching the John Birch Society when someone walked into the United States Holocaust Museum and shot the guard and killed the guard. And before he had done that, he had dedicated the act to Revilo Oliver of the John Birch Society. And so I feel like there's probably an article there that I need to pull out. I'm really interested still in the Minute Women of Indianapolis, the 1950s side of the conspiracy theory. I want to do more with Marguerite Dice, who helped found the John Birch Society. I want to know more about her, and I'm doing research on her. Gosh, there are so many things, honestly.
Yeah.
I have too many, and I'm going to have to scale it back because I cannot move in these directions simultaneously. But I'd still like to do more with the feminist movement as well. And I got a sense looking at their writings in the 1980s at how difficult they had found that turn in the state, and how,
Yeah.
honestly, I don't know what else to say except sad, how just emotional and difficult that was for them. And I don't know how else to get at it but do more oral history and more oral interviews to try to get a sense for how they understand their activism, you know, over time. I would like to know more about that as
Well,
well.
and I think that would be great, because I know that we do have some of the women who fought for the ERA in Indiana who are on this call with us.
Well, let's pull them in now. I would like to hear from the audience.
So maybe they will want to reach out to you, and maybe that could be something that happens. We
I
can
think that would be
extend
awesome.
this research project and you know, have even more scholarship done on this interesting time in Indiana history, for sure.
As many sources as there are in the Indiana Historical Society, there is always room for more.
There's always room for more, absolutely. So I think we're gonna take some questions. Are you ready for that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I am.
All right, let's do it. So my first one, let's see. In Jill Lepore's history of these truths, she makes an argument that it was basically the actions of grassroots conservative women that birthed the conservative movement of the 1960s and beyond. What is your take on this argument?
I mean, since I study women's politics, that really resonates with me, because I do see the work that women did to even support male organizations. Like the John Birch Society is not a women's organization, and yet if you look at the internal workings of that organization, women are operating those American Opinion bookstores. Women are hosting the parties that are supposed to happen weekly for the lifeblood of that organization to continue. It is largely men who publish in their newsletters, but when you look at how the organization functions, women are critical to that. So for me, and maybe it's because I am a women's historian and I'm looking for the women's participation, that certainly resonates. There are some really great quotes, you know, both in my book, but also in other people's book, about how especially conservative women support the work of men, but do not seek the credit or the spotlight. And Marguerite Dice is a great example of that. You know, she is a woman who hosted the meeting that began the John Birch Society in Indianapolis. And she brought, as I understand, Robert Welch to her home. And that's why it was done in Indianapolis. He was from Massachusetts, but it was a great middle meeting place. And Marguerite Dice was there with a committed record of activism and anti-communism. And she had reached out to him, and she was a contact of his. And she's the one who, it was in her living room that all of this work is going on. We know almost nothing of her, but it wouldn't have happened clearly without her work. So I tend to agree. The conservative movement is built with women, whether they want the credit or not.
And sort of in that same vein, can you talk a little bit more about what you did learn about the conservative women's views and motivations? And then also you talked about how it took you a while to understand the anti-ERA folks. And so how did you bridge that connection to sort of empathize?
Yeah. Well, I think, in the interviews that I did, that was the where I really got a sense for where they were coming from. And part of that is just when you sit down with someone, it's just so much easier to understand. I think they would tell you their politics was motivated first by motherhood. They saw themselves as organizing against a feminist movement that sought to, in some way, denigrate their role as mothers. By the way, the feminist movement in no way agrees with this. So I am not giving you an argument that is an analytical one. I'm giving you the argument as they would have explained it. So to understand their motivation, they saw themselves as first organized because of their role as mothers, and secondly, I think, or right there with it, would be organized against what they saw as a humanist movement, a movement that sought to topple the primacy of Judeo-Christian tradition, sought to eliminate a right and a wrong, and to create a relativist world. And then for the conspiracists, the idea that this movement was also connected to this idea, a long-standing idea of eliminating local autonomy in furtherance of a collectivist vision. I don't know how else to describe it, but that feminists were part of this way of thinking about the world that prioritized collectivism and communalism, whereas these women wanted to prioritize the family unit, as they would argue, ordained by God, with man at a head and woman as a subordinate and children as subordinates from there. And any challenge to that, both gender structure and to the autonomy of the family, was going to be fought by them and understood as part of this larger global movement to turn away from God and to embrace a collectivism at the expense of American sovereignty, male authority, and the primacy of the family. And it took me a long time to make those connections, because I did not understand those connections. You read the editorials, and if you're not steeped in an anti-communist conservative worldview, calling the Equal Rights Amendment, I think at one time, they kind of paraphrased it as one world or zombies. What is it that they're saying? Like, who's a one world or zombie, and what is a one world or zombie? You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about? It took a long time. I just had to keep going back. You know what I mean? Like, where are they coming from? I literally said it to myself over and over. And it took me into the 50s at least. And honestly, it goes back into the early 20th century. In the book, I talk about, like, some of these conspiracies are as old and older than the country itself. They predate the revolution. So conspiratorial thinking has been around a long time, and surprisingly, it hasn't actually changed that much. The targets have changed, but the ideas are very long lasting. That's the part that took a while.
Yeah, it's really interesting that and I think it's interesting, you did mention in your book, in the introduction, about how we have to understand women's interactions and the contested nature of what womanhood and citizenship meant to different women at different times, in order to get like a fuller picture of women's history.
Because they definitely would have fought over the term anti-woman. They were definitely anti-feminist, but I think they would have challenged you on the idea that they were anti-woman, because their argument is that they are actually they are pushing a way forward for women, an important role for women, a political role for women, and for women as citizens. It's just not a feminist understanding of that. And so it is the contested nature of women's politics is how I would best describe it. They don't agree on what women's roles should be, and how women should participate as citizens. You can come
Can
in
you
with the
talk a little bit?
questions. Yeah.
Yeah. What about a little bit more about the vision of the pro-ERA women?
That one was easier for me, or more intuitive for me to understand. And so I think, not all feminist organizations believed the same thing, and certainly not all feminists believed the same things. There were divisions within that camp. Race seemed to divide the movement, certainly. The radical feminists, the women who were into consciousness raising and small groups, the Indianapolis Women's Liberation, for example. I love that flyer they had on Earth Day and the ecology of women, and it's a pre-ERA kind of event. And they were looking at all kinds of things, environmentalism, and they were looking at art, and they were looking at lesbianism, and they were looking at, cooperative childcare, opportunities. And I think for some of those women, the ERA really regimented what the feminist movement was supposed to be in Indiana. And that was where they kind of felt like maybe they got muzzled with that low-key strategy. So for women who are interested in sort of that liberationist idea, the Equal Rights Amendment was a good idea, but certainly just one connected to many others. It didn't necessarily have the primacy that sometimes other organizations for women wanted to see it. The Women's Political Caucus, for example, or what we would call reformist feminist groups, who just wanted to see more women represented in the current system. For them, the Equal Rights Amendment was just absolutely essential. But if you were more of a radical and a liberationist and didn't necessarily want to participate in the system as it existed anyway, the ERA was maybe not so important to you. So I don't want to make any blanket statements about a feminist vision, because I think really there's Benita Roth calls it, there are feminisms of the second wave. There is not a feminism, but feminisms, plural. And that's a positive thing. That's actually a good thing. We want there to be difference of opinion on these visions, right? So they didn't always agree, but most of the time they did agree that the Equal Rights Amendment was a good idea. And it was just over the degree to which it should take over the movement, take over energy. Because obviously we all know if you're spending a lot of energy on one thing, you're not spending that energy on something else. And so that was kind of the problem that emerged, I think, for the feminist groups, trying to figure out, how important is this to us?
Another question here. One argument that we don't need the ERA is that we have laws to protect women. Mm-hmm. Can you explain the importance of an amendment that grants constitutional rights?
Well, I mean, certainly that was an argument that conservatives made, that there were all kinds of important laws that already protected women, like the Pregnancy Rights Act, or the Pregnancy Disability Act, for example. You couldn't get fired anymore for being pregnant, so therefore we don't need an Equal Rights Amendment, right? But I think for most people who are, for example, lawyers in this field, there is kind of a patchwork approach to both federal law and state law as it applies to some of these issues. The Supreme Court has been clear on, like, Frontier v. Richardson and sometimes other kinds of things like insurance rights. Women have to be able now to provide, for example, health insurance benefits to their spouses, just as men are able to provide health insurance benefits to their female spouses or to their same-sex partners now. But in the 1970s, that was not at all clear. That continues to be the case. We have a patchwork approach to these women's rights issues. One thing, were we talking about it before, but something I'm really curious about is childcare and family leave.
Yes.
In women's and men's access to family leave, especially related to pregnancy, is not the same. And so, after the birth of a child or after the adoption of a child, men and women's access is not the same. And so this is something that the Equal Rights Amendment, were it passed, would certainly affect. Well, and then something as obvious as the Selective Service Act. We still require men to enroll in the Selective Service Act at 18, but we do not require women. We have an all-volunteer military, but and women now can serve in combat positions, but we've never actually required women to fill out the Selective Service. So this would be something also that the Equal Rights Amendment could nail down for us. What do we believe as a society? Is allowing women to serve in combat, are we saying that they are equally then available to a draft? I don't know that answer, but I think an Equal Rights Amendment would solve it. These are just a few, but there really are ongoing issues that continue to come up in our lives that the absence of an Equal Rights Amendment speaks to, and certainly having an Equal Rights Amendment would change then how we understand those.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point too. Another question here, half of the states have enacted state provisions comparable to the ERA. However, it seems that these state provisions, it doesn't seem that these state provisions have helped bring equal pay for equal work. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, I am no political science expert, and I don't know the details of what every state is doing, but I am aware of the gender wage gap. And so I'm fully aware that our efforts thus far have not yielded, pay equity. And, honestly, the 19th Amendment faced this too. Some women were enfranchised by their states before the Equal Rights Amendment, the 19th Amendment. So the fact that some states have already provided some legislation that extends protection for women and honestly for LGBTQ plus, the LGBTQ plus community on gender and sexuality issues, does not solve the issue by any means. So it actually kind of, I think, speaks to the need. Do we want to create then a federal amendment to make this a national law? Certainly, New York had already provided women the right to vote before the 19th Amendment was ratified, and many Western states had. So the fact that states had acted was not seen as a reason not to pass the amendment. It was actually seen as, we're making headway. This actually means that more states might be supportive of this. Let's try to push for something that is uniform so that all American women can expect and know what it would be to expect equality.
Let's see. Here's another question. Did you see the Mrs. America series on Hulu by chance?
Oh, I haven't watched it yet. I'm so excited to watch it. And historians have been talking about it. Full disclosure, I have a 2-year-old and have not had childcare for a while and have missed out on most everything that has happened since COVID began, at least. So it is on my list of things to do if we ever get back to normal, and I can depend on childcare again and actually have. I was telling somebody today, like, you can put a book in my box. I don't know when I'm going to read it.
Right.
Yeah, but that is definitely on my list.
Yeah. Well, someone had asked a question because there was an LA Times article recently that talked about it critiques Mrs. America, but also pushes the idea that the insurance industry and other economic interests worked to kill the ERA, and how much was this a factor as opposed to, Phyllis Schlafly and the Stop ERA movement?
Well, I don't know. I only know the Hoosier really experience because I only did the case study, and I've not read. I don't know if the argument there is they provided funding or exactly what the mechanism was for them supporting that. The ERA was ratified or was approved by Congress, so it made that hurdle and it was out to the states. So they would have to have had an approach to stop it at the ratification level. And I've not seen anybody really talking about that, so I'll have to check out the article and see if they provide more details on it. It certainly seems like in Indiana, the ERA was a grassroots. The Stop ERA campaign was grassroots. It mobilized it seemed like largely housewives, although there were definitely single women involved. And that's another area that I'm really interested in, single women in a movement that really valorizes motherhood. How do single women participate in that, and what do they see as their role in organizations like that? But it certainly seemed to be one that was, the money came from small donations. Um, I never saw any evidence of a lot of money backing. They weren't bringing in a whole lot of speakers. Phyllis Schlafly was really about the only person coming in to rally the troops. You know what I mean? But I don't know. So I would definitely read that article. You said the LA Times?
Yes. So it's an LA Times article
Is
from.
that in the chat link? Can we put that up?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes,
We'll see. We'll see if Callie and Bethany can get that going, or somebody, whoever asked the question, perhaps.
Mary
might be
Beth
able to
put
link
it in, and we'll add it to what we send out tomorrow.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah, I'll look for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone so much for all your fascinating questions. And thank you so much, Erin, for sharing all of your knowledge about this topic. Please check out Big Sister. It's a fascinating read. And I'll toss it back to you, Callie.
Thank you both so much. I was having a lot of fun with and thank you all. The chat was great tonight. I was having a lot of fun talking with all of you as we've been going along.
If there are any women who are participants in the second wave movement and they want to share with me their email addresses, I sure would. If you can send them to Callie, I don't really know how the tech works, but if you can give them to Callie, maybe she can send them to me if you give the approval.
I actually put your email in the question and answer section, so you can email them right to Erin.
Excellent.
Yes. We've already had 1 or 2 questions about that.
Wonderful.
So I'm so glad you all were able to come. And shout out to Representative Arrington. Like, thanks for everything you do. So next week, we're going to be back with more happy hours. So join us for another brief history of underwear on August 13th. And then keep an eye out for more happy hours coming soon. We're talking about the stuff of suffrage, voting, cemeteries, Jewish migration, so much more. Great things coming. Same place, same time, new Zoom link. On Saturday, we're learning how to preserve your family's recipes with me in an online workshop. So come find out how to keep your most delicious family traditions going for future generations. That's on Saturday about 10 a.m. On August 18th, we're teaming up with our friends for Women for Change Indiana to give you a chance to meet the bold and gutsy ladies who fought for our political prowess, and I like to say right to party, at Women Behaving Badly. We'll send you some recipes for themed food to you to bring along to Zoom, where you can go into different rooms and meet these revolutionary ladies from Indiana. And then, if that wasn't enough, we're really finishing up our celebration of our suffrage centennial with a bang. From August 29th to September 4th, we're working with our friends from around the state to bring you the suffrage block party. We're pulling out all the stops to remember our Hoosier heroines who fought for our right to vote, again, and party, in a week-long virtual festival that includes 35 events, 5 in-person socially distanced experiences, and free toolkits for all. You can find out how to bring the festival to your backyard at indianahistory.org. I know some of you have already gotten your toolkits. I saw that in the chat. They are great. I can't wait for y'all to see them. If you missed a chance to donate and would like to make a future gift to IHS, you can visit indianahistory.org, and I believe Bethany will be putting the link to donate in the chat. Your donation allows us to continue to share Hoosier stories and events like this, and we really appreciate it. You'll get an email from us tomorrow. We mentioned that a couple times tonight. That'll have all the links and a survey. It takes you 1 minute. We'd love to know what you thought, how we can make events like this better in the future, and what you want to hear about at future History Happy Hours. And this conversation will be posted to the IHS YouTube and website in the upcoming weeks. So thank you so much for coming. Stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, and I can't wait to see you hopefully next week for more. Bye, everybody.
Go IHS.
Bye, thank you.
You all are killing it.
Thanks.
My gosh.
Just,
Did you say you were going to have 35 events?
in 1 week, yeah, it's something. It's going to be great. It's not just us. We're working with, I think there's 16 partner organizations, and 4 or 5 of those are our steering committee, like people that are helping us put it together.
That is crazy. That is so awesome.
Yeah, it's been a fun, we've pivoted from a big block party on our